When you hear the name Saladin, what comes to mind? Probably a mighty sultan, right? A legendary warrior who built a massive empire and famously defeated the Crusaders. But what if I told you that the man behind that legend was at his very core a scholar? That the person who knew him best, his own secretary, described him as a quiet, studious young man who was way more interested in books than in battles. That's the paradox we're going to unpack in this explainer, the real story of Saladin.
So, our main guide on this journey is Baha ad-Din ibn Shaddad. This guy was Saladin's personal secretary, by his side for years, writing everything down. And right out of the gate, he hits us with this massive contradiction. The man who would one day reconquer Jerusalem spent his youth in a library, not a training yard. And that tension, right there, is the absolute key to understanding his entire life.
So you've got these two versions of the same guy. On the left, there's the legend we all know, the military powerhouse. But on the right, there's the man that Baha ad-Din knew, the deeply religious, incredibly generous scholar. And what we're going to see is how the man on the right was always shaping the actions of the legend on the left.
All right, here's how we're going to break it down. We'll look at his surprising rise to power, see how he actually built his empire, and then get into his most famous act of conquest and compassion. After that, we'll explore his epic rivalry with Richard the Lionheart, and finally, try to make sense of his paradoxical legacy. Let's dive in.
Okay, let's jump into part 1, Forging an Empire. Now, the crucial thing to understand is that Saladin's journey to the top didn't start because he was some power-hungry guy. Honestly, he was kind of a reluctant leader, pushed onto the world stage by family duty and just pure fate.
His whole military career really kicks off in Egypt, where he was serving under his uncle, a formidable general named Sher Kha. Think of these campaigns as his real-world education in war and politics. But notice, he's not the big boss here. He's learning the ropes, making a name for himself in battle, but he's very much in his uncle's shadow.
And then, boom, fate steps in. Just 2 months after becoming the de facto ruler of Egypt, his uncle Sher Kha just dies. The Egyptian court has to pick a successor, and they choose his quiet, bookish 31-year-old nephew. Now, why him? Because they thought he was young, inexperienced, and would be easy to manipulate. Turns out, that was one of the single biggest political miscalculations in history. Yeah, the guy they thought was a puppet? He turned out to be a political grandmaster. But look at how he takes control. It's not with some big, bloody coup. It's all patience and surgical precision. First, he makes sure the army is loyal to him. Then, this brilliant symbolic move. He changes the allegiance in the Friday prayers, a public announcement heard in every single mosque. And finally, when the old caliph dies, he just doesn't name a new one. He completely dismantles a 200-year-old dynasty, not with a roar, but with a quiet, strategic whisper.
All right, on to part 2, Conquest and Compassion. Now that he's secured Egypt and dealt with his rivals in Syria, Saladin turns his full attention to the Crusader kingdoms and, of course, the ultimate prize, the city of Jerusalem.
The conditions were just perfect for a huge showdown. You've got the Crusader kingdom, which is a total mess internally, full of rivalries. Then you have this one rogue lord, Reginald of Chatillon, who just keeps breaking truces and provoking everybody. Meanwhile, Saladin has done something no Muslim leader had managed in generations. He united the entire region under one command for one purpose. The stage was set.
And the result? The Battle of Hattin. And look, this wasn't just a win. It was total decimation. Saladin brilliantly lured the entire Crusader army into a trap where there was no water and just systematically took them apart. He captured their king and, in a huge symbolic victory, he captured the true cross, their holiest relic. In just one day, the military might of the Kingdom of Jerusalem was effectively erased.
So, with their army wiped out, Jerusalem is a sitting duck. And you can bet everyone, both inside and outside the city walls, was thinking the exact same thing. They all remembered what had happened 88 years before, when the first Crusaders took the city. The question on everyone's mind was terrifyingly simple. Would Saladin repay that horrific brutality in kind? And his answer, well, it became legendary. Just look at this contrast. In 1099, it was a bloodbath. In 1197, it was something else entirely. Saladin offered mercy. If you could pay a ransom, you could leave in peace. For the thousands who couldn't afford it, he and his commanders actually paid their ransoms for them, out of their own pockets. This wasn't a conqueror's move. This was the scholar, the deeply religious man Baha ad-Din knew, applying his principles of mercy to his greatest military victory.
Okay, let's get to part 3. Richard and Saladin. The fall of Jerusalem sends absolute shockwaves through Europe and kicks off the Third Crusade, which sets the stage for one of the most incredible rivalries in all of history.
And who's leading this crusade? None other than Richard the Lionheart, a military genius himself and pretty much the only king in Europe who could go toe-to-toe with Saladin on the battlefield. So this becomes more than just a war, it's a personal contest between two living legends.
But here's where things get really wild. I mean, the fighting was brutal for sure, but in between you had these unbelievable moments of chivalry. At one point, Richard gets a bad fever, so Saladin sends him his own personal doctors along with fresh fruit and snow from the mountains to help cool him down. Their brothers were in constant peace talks. Richard even proposed that his sister marry Saladin's brother so they could co-rule Jerusalem. It's just incredible. It never happened, but it shows you the level of respect. In the end, they signed a treaty. Jerusalem stayed with Saladin, but Christian pilgrims were guaranteed safe passage to visit.
And that brings us to our final part, a legacy of paradox. After a whole life spent at war, ruling an empire, how does the story of this scholar Sultan actually end?
Just a few months after making peace with Richard, Saladin died. He was only 55, but it was a hard 55 years. The man was almost constantly on campaign. So the ruler of this vast empire, who had faced down the greatest kings of Europe, what do you think he left behind?
This is it. When the ruler of an empire stretching from Egypt to Syria died, this is what was found in his personal treasury. 1 single gold coin, and about 3 dozen silver ones. That's all.
His own secretary, Baha ad-Din, the man who was right there, wrote that Saladin didn't even leave behind enough money to pay for his own burial. It's the ultimate proof that his legendary generosity wasn't some kind of performance. The pious scholar who was generous to a fault had literally spent a lifetime giving away the immense wealth of an empire to the poor, to his soldiers, and to public works, leaving absolutely nothing for himself.
And that's why his legacy is just so unique. In the Islamic world, of course he's a giant, the great unifier, the liberator of Jerusalem. But in Europe, something totally unheard of happened. His enemies, the very people he fought against, came to admire him as a model of chivalry and honor. The poet Dante even put Saladin in limbo, right alongside the great heroes of ancient Greece and Rome. He was the only Muslim from that era given such a place of honor.
So, it all leaves us with this final question. Saladin was, without a doubt, a man of immense power and military genius. But was it his strength that truly made his legacy last? Or was it the character of that quiet, studious man, the scholar who valued piety, justice, and mercy above all else, that ultimately shaped his conquests and created a legacy that even his greatest enemies had no choice but to respect?